Dark rain clouds rained in the sky. Was that why? Did the sun come here with me because it went on a trip when no one could see it? He wondered to himself. It reached out its hand and caressed his face. And then the boy hadn't been a person. There had never been anyone who saw him as a person. But that day, he became one. 3 late fire moon September 4:15 and the Ray Esti's kingdom, at the royal capital, at the innermost part of the city sat Rolent Castle. It occupied an enormous space. The curtain wall around it was almost a mile long. It was furnished with 12 giant cylindrical towers. These towers formed the defense network. The room was in one of those 12 towers. It was a not so large unlit space. There was a single bed. Lying on it was a child. His age fell right at the vague border between boy and young man. His blonde hair was cropped short. His skin glowed with a healthy tan. Climb, that was the only name he had. He was a soldier attending the woman often titled Golden. He was permitted closer to her than any other, a position many looked upon with envy. He woke up early, rising before the sun. By the time he noticed his consciousness returning from the deep, dark world of sleep, his mind was clear. His body was primed for the most part. One of the things he had pride in was how easily he could fall asleep and wake up. Clime's almond-shaped eyes, with the whites visible below the iris, opened wide. They revealed his iron will shining within. He pushed back the rather heavy blanket covering his body. Even in summer, nights surrounded by stone were chilly. He sat up and touched his face near his eyes. His fingers came away soaking wet. That dream again. Climb wiped the tears off his face with his sleeves. Maybe the heavy rain from 2 days ago had reminded him of his childhood. They were grieving tears. How many people did one meet in life whom they could respect? Was everyone lucky enough to serve a person for whom they would give their life without hesitation? That day, Climb had met a woman for whom he firmly believed he could die without a bit of regret. What he had wiped away were tears of joy. He had cried out of gratitude for the miracle that began with that meeting. With determination on his face, still appropriately childish for his age, Climb stood up. In this dark world, bereft of even a single light, Climb whispered in a voice hoarse from too much training. Shine. In response to Climb's keyword, a white light appeared in a lamp suspended from the ceiling. It illuminated the room. The lamp was a magic item imbued with continual light. Although this type of item was commonly available, it was still expensive. He had one not entirely due to his special position. It was unsafe to burn something, even for lighting, in a place like a stone tower where air did not circulate very well. For that reason, despite the significant initial cost, almost all the rooms were equipped with a magic light. The floor and walls illuminated by the white light were hewn from rock. A thin rug provided as much protection as it could against the cold hardness of the floor. The other things in the room were a coarsely made wooden bed, a wardrobe large enough to hold armor, a desk with a drawer, and a wooden chair covered by a thin cushion. Perhaps it seemed shabby to an outsider. But for someone of Climb's rank, it was undeserved luxury. Soldiers didn't get private quarters. They usually slept together in large rooms with shared bunks. The only other furnishing they were provided was a wooden lockbox to store personal belongings. He also had white full-plate armor enshrined in one corner of the room. Rank-and-file soldiers were rarely supplied with such well-made gear. It was so lustrous and unblemished it seemed to gleam from within. This special treatment certainly wasn't anything Climb had earned through his own actions. The gear was a token of affection from his master. It was no wonder people were jealous of him. Opening the wardrobe, Climb removed some clothes and dressed himself using the mirror inside. After putting on a shirt that smelled metallic from frequent use, he donned a shirt of mail over it. Normally he'd put armor above the mail, but he didn't do that now. Instead, he slipped on a vest lined with many pockets and a pair of pants to finish the outfit. He carried a bucket with a towel in his hand. Lastly, he checked the mirror to make sure nothing was strange and that nothing about his outfit was in disarray. Any failure on his part could be used to criticize his master, Golden Princess Renna, so Climb took the utmost care. His purpose wasn't to cause trouble for her. He was there to give his master everything he had. He closed his eyes before the mirror and imagined her face. Golden Princess Renna Thaya Chardalan Rylve self. She possessed such heavenly beauty she could easily be mistaken for a goddess. She radiated with a compassionate spirit befitting her noble blood. Her superior wisdom gave birth to her government policies. She was a noble among nobles, a princess among princesses, the supreme woman. Climb could not allow himself to put so much as a nick in the untarnished gem that sparkled like gold. If their relationship were a ring, Rena would be a large, brilliant cut diamond. Climb was nothing but the prongs surrounding her. Since his make was cheap, he lowered the item's overall worth, but he couldn't allow it to fall any further. Climb was unable to stop the passion from building in his chest every time he thought of her. Even a devout believer in the gods could not surpass Climb's current fervor. He gazed at himself for a short time. He nodded with the satisfaction that his appearance would not bring his master shame. Then he left the room. It was late fire moon September. The time was 4:35 a.m. Climb headed for the large hall. This hall occupied the tower's entire first floor as a training area. Usually it was filled with the body heat of soldiers. But of course, no one was there this early in the morning. The empty space was so quiet he could practically hear the silence. Because the room was enclosed in stone, Climb's footsteps echoed loudly. Quasi-permanent magic lights brightly illuminated the hall. Inside were standing suits of armor fastened to posts. There were also straw figures used as archery targets. Along the walls were shelves lined with a variety of dull-bladed weapons. There was a reason a training area normally found outside had been built indoors. Valencia Palace was housed within the Row-Lent Castle compound. If soldiers trained in the open, visiting messengers could see them. This wasn't very dignified, so several facilities were built inside the towers. It was also an option to show off the manly training soldiers as a diplomatic stratagem, but that wasn't the kingdom's style. The prevailing mindset was to present an elegant, gorgeous, and noble picture of the realm. That said, some exercises required being outside. These were performed stealthily in a corner of the grounds, on an athletic field beyond the walls, or away from the capital entirely. Climb entered the hushed room, penetrating the chilly air, and began leisurely stretching in a corner. After a thorough 30-minute stretch routine, Climb's face was more than a little flushed. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his exhaled breaths brimmed with heat. He put a hand to his forehead and wiped off the perspiration before approaching the weapon shelf and choosing a fairly thick, large, and dull iron practice sword. The hand around the weapon was hardened from repeatedly forming and popping blisters. He tested different swords until he found one that fit his grip perfectly. Next, he placed lumps of metal in his pockets, buttoning them to make sure the contents wouldn't fall out. With several pieces inside, the vest had taken on the same weight as a full suit of armor. Ordinary full-plate armor was sturdy, but it was also heavy. The limited range of movement was another disadvantage. If one wanted to practice under conditions similar to actual combat, training in armor was ideal. But Climb didn't often take out a full suit of armor just to practice. Besides, he couldn't wear the white mail he'd been given for training. That's why he resorted to this substitute instead. Climb tightly gripped the iron weapon, which was larger than a great sword. He raised it over his head and lowered it slowly as he exhaled. As its tip was about to touch the floor, he brought it up again, inhaling. Gradually increasing the speed of his practice swings, he concentrated intently. He stared into space with a penetrating gaze. He did over 300 repetitions. Climb was bright red, and sweat dripped down his face. The heat building up in his body dramatically raised his breath's temperature. Climb was a fairly well-built soldier, but the weight of the oversized great sword was still extreme. It was especially difficult slowing the sword so the tip didn't touch the ground. The amount of strength needed for this was not insignificant. After 500 repetitions, both his arms began cramping as though screaming out to him. A waterfall cascaded down his face. Climb was aware that this was his limit. Still, he didn't seem interested in stopping. But that's enough, don't you think? Someone else called out to him. Climb was flustered as he turned to look in the direction of the voice. He immediately noticed a man. There was no word more fitting for him than robust. He was like steel incarnate. Because his craggy face was frowning, the ensuing mass of wrinkles made him appear older than his actual age. His bulging muscles showed he was no ordinary man. There probably wasn't a single soldier in the kingdom who didn't know this figure. Captain Stronov, captain of the Royal Select Gaze of Stronov. He was the strongest warrior in the country. It was said he had no equals in neighboring realms either. Any more than that is too much. No point in killing yourself. Climb lowered his sword and watched his spasming arms. You're right. I might have pushed myself a bit too hard. Climb expressionlessly thanked Gazef. The older man shrugged. If you really think so, then it would be great if you wouldn't make me say the same thing all the time. I wonder how many times it has been I am sorry. Gazef shrugged once more at the boy's head, bowed an apology. The pair had exchanged these lines many times, almost like a greeting. Usually this was where it ended. They would each become absorbed in their own training, but today was different. How about it, Climb? Want to try sparring? Climb's expressionless mask began to crack for a moment. Up until now, these two had met in this place. They had never sparred. It was an unwritten law. There were no benefits to training together. There were benefits, but there were too many drawbacks. At present, the nobles faction, comprising 3 of the 6 great noble families, and the King's faction were in a struggle for power. The country's situation was dire. Some believed the only thing holding everything together was the yearly war with the Empire. There was no way the King's right-hand man, captain of the Royal Select, Gaze of Stronov, could possibly lose. But supposing he did, the nobles faction opposing them would use it as ammunition to attack the king under the present circumstances. Likewise, if Climb lost, the nobles would probably take it as a chance to claim he couldn't be trusted to protect the princess. The fact that a common soldier of dubious pedigree had been appointed to guard the peerlessly beautiful and unwed princess rubbed many nobles the wrong way. And so, their respective positions would not forgive a loss. It was out of the question to show any weakness, expose a vital point, or allow openings that could be attacked. They both acted with the utmost prudence to avoid causing any trouble for their masters. This was a priority they shared because they were both commoners. What reason could Gazef have for breaking this rule? Climb looked around. It couldn't be simply that no one else was there. The walls had eyes in this place. Someone was likely observing from afar or watching in the shadows, but he couldn't think of any other explanations. Unsure if it was a good reason or a bad one, Climb was confused and shaken, though he didn't let it show on his face. The warrior said to be the strongest in the kingdom stood before him. Gazef keenly detected the split-second disturbance in Climb's emotions. Normal humans would have naturally missed it before he gave his response. I was shown recently how green I still am. I'd like to train with someone who LL pose a bit of a challenge. You green, sir. Under what circumstances would Gazef learn he was still green? It was then that Climb remembered his unit had been missing members lately. Since Climb didn't have any close friends, he only heard the rumors bouncing around the mess hall. Apparently, the Royal Select had been caught up in something and lost a few men. Yeah, if that charitable caster hadn't helped me, I probably wouldn't be here right now hearing that. Climb felt his iron mask crumble. He couldn't help it, but who wouldn't be surprised? His curiosity got the better of him, and he asked, a charitable caster? His name was Aints Ul Gown. I am not sure, but I think he is on the level of the Empire's monstrous casters. It was not a name Climb had ever heard before. The young soldier admired heroes and had a secret hobby of collecting sagas regardless of what race the epic originated from. Not only that, but he also collected as many exciting stories as he could from famous adventurers in the region. He didn't recognize the name Gazef mentioned. Of course, there was always the possibility it was a pseudonym. SONNGH. Climb suppressed his desire to ask details. I hesitated to ask about an incident that cost him some of his men. One can only be so rude. I'll remember that name. So is it really all right for you to train me? I'm not training you. We're sparring. Whether you learn something from it is up to you. You're one of the best soldiers this country has. It'll be meaningful exercise for me too. That was high praise, but Climb considered it polite decorum. Climb wasn't remarkably strong. The standard he measured against was simply low. The kingdom's soldiers were only marginally stronger than the average citizens. They were weak compared to the Empire's knights, who were full-time soldiers. No member of this kingdom's army was famous enough to be known throughout the region. The men directly under Gazef were strong, certainly, but still not quite as strong as Climb. Among adventurers, ranked bronze, iron, silver, gold, platinum, mithril, orichalcum, and adamantite. Climb was probably gold. It wasn't as if he was weak, but there were always many stronger people. Could someone like him really engage in a sparring match worth the time of Gazef, a warrior who was undoubtedly adamantite rank? Climb chased all the discouraging thoughts from his mind. It would be an extremely valuable experience to learn from the strongest man in the kingdom. Even if he disappointed Gazef, Climb would have no regrets. Okay, then I'd like to go around, please. Gazef grinned and nodded once with enthusiasm. They walked to the weapon rack together and equipped swords that were exactly the right size for them. Gazef chose a bastard sword, and Climb selected a small shield and a broadsword. Then Climb took the lumps of metal out from his pockets. It would be rude to face someone stronger while still wearing them. Not to mention that if he didn't fight as hard as he could, he wouldn't grow. His opponent was the strongest warrior in the kingdom. Confronting this considerable challenge would require his all. Soon Climb finished his preparations. Gazef asked, "And are your arms okay? Are they not numb anymore?" "No, sir, I am fine now. They feel a bit warm, but there's no problem with my grip." Climb waved his arms. Gazef saw from the way they moved that the boy was telling the truth and nodded. "Okay, but in a way, that's kind of too bad. You run into all kinds of situations on the battlefield. You can always fight at your best. If your grip is weak, you need to adjust your style appropriately. Are you working on that?" "And no, I am not. In that case, I'll do more practice swings." "Oh no, you don't have to go that far. But you're protecting the princess most of the time. It wouldn't be a waste to practice things like how to fight if you get attacked somewhere you're not allowed to carry a sword, and familiarize yourself with different weapons." "Yes, sir." There are 9 basic disciplines of armed combat swords: shields, spears, axes, daggers, combat gauntlets, bows, bludgeons, and throwing weapons. If you try to learn too many things, you'll end up neglecting them all. I recommend narrowing it down to 2 or 3 and practicing those. "Okay, apologies for the boring commentary. It wasn't boring, Captain Stronov. Thank you." Gazef smiled awkwardly and waved off Climb's gratitude. "If you're ready, then let us get started. For now, come as you are. Later I can train you, but I'll give you some tips on fighting in the other disciplines." "Yes, sir." "Looking forward to it." "Right, but know that it's not my intention for this to be a drill. Come at me like it's a real battle." Climb slowly moved into a stance with his sword held low, facing Gazef with the left side of his body hidden behind the shield. His eyes were sharp, already treating this as more than practice. He could sense Gazef was also taking it seriously. They stared each other down, but Climb couldn't move. He was nimbler after removing the lumps of metal from his pockets, but Climb still didn't feel like he could beat Gazef. In both physical strength and experience, Gazef completely surpassed him. If he was careless in how he advanced, the captain would effortlessly intercept him. His opponent was superior, and there wasn't anything he could do about that. But if this were a real battle, would Climb simply lose his life because there was nothing to be done? So then what? He would have to meet Gazef with something Gazef didn't have. Climb lost out on strength, experience, and mental fortitude, everything a warrior needed. If there was an exception, it would be in gear. Gazef had a bastard sword. Climb, however, had a broadsword and a small shield. If they were magical equipment, one blade could be superior to another, but these were made for training. In terms of weapons, he wasn't ahead. But whereas Gazef had only one weapon, Climb had 2. A shield could be used offensively as well. In exchange for dividing his attack power, Climb had an advantage in versatility. He could deflect a blow with the shield and then swing the sword, or parry with the sword and strike with the shield. Climb observed Gazef's movements carefully, aiming for opportunities to counterattack. After a few seconds, the older man smiled slightly. "You're not going to charge? Then I'll start. Here I come." Displaying absolute calm, Gazef held his sword aloft. He lowered his hips slightly, suffusing his frame with energy like a tense spring. Climb braced himself as well, so he'd be ready to defend whenever the sword was swung. Then Gazef rushed forward and swung down at Climb's shield. He's fast. Climb gave up on maneuvering the shield to deflect the oncoming hit. He transferred all his attention and ability into the basic defensive act of withstanding the assault. In the next moment, a tremendous shock assailed his shield. Did it break from that one attack? It certainly felt like it, as the blow was so mighty it immobilized Clime's shield-bound hand. The strike was the kind that he had to block with his entire body. Deflect? How could I even match his speed like this? If I could at least get it to glance off smoothly, as Climb chided himself for being so naive. Another shock assaulted his stomach.